I have 2 kids. They're not kids anymore. They're in their early 30s now. But when they were young, they just started to go to school, and they were just started to be exposed to this concept of discrimination, prejudice. They were taught that. Teachers started to teach the idea of prejudice and discrimination. I was actually offended by that. I was offended by that the teacher would teach prejudice and discrimination, because they're trying to turn my kids into victims. So one day I said to my daughter, my son listening, he was the younger one, I said, supposedly in class and your teacher said to you, I don't like you. I just don't like you because of who you are, because of the color of your skin, because of your color of your hair, or whatever, because your last name. Is that discrimination? And my daughter said, yeah, of course it is. Teacher says so. But then I said, if the teacher said to you, I like you a lot because you're just like me, or you're not like me, but whatever it is, I like you because of the color of your skin, the color of your eye, the last name, and whatever. Is that discrimination? And my daughter looks at me and she didn't quite know how to answer. I said, the guy who did that, the person who did just that, is as racist as the first person. Don't be a victim. Don't be a victim. All I wanted to do here is that I don't want us to be victims. I don't want us to be victims. There are too many people out there who are turning us into victims, institutionalizing victimhood. That's why I'm not political, because I'm neither Democrat nor Republican. Both sides are using us. One side is using hate, and one side is using guilt. I just don't want us to be victims. I don't want us to feel like victims. I want us to be protected with the best that we have, which is our compassion and our loving kindness and our wisdom. But it takes work to get there. And that's why I spoke about the emancipation of a mind. When we're being used by the politician, whether it's guilt or hate, one side versus the other, they're incarcerating us. They're trying to use us. And the only way we prevent us from being utilized that way is to understand how our mind works. So I spoke about the 5 Skandhas. The form, which are the eyes, the physics, the physiology, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the physics, which are the light, the smell, the taste, one part of existence, which is the physical. And to understand how our mind works, we need to go beyond the physical. And that's when we're actually turning our physiology and the physics into neurology. All our nerve endings is in the spine. That's why the spine is so important. And then the next step is called the perception, which is when we start to understand what we see, when we start to develop our like and dislike. And then eventually it goes to the next skandha, which is called volition. Whether it's hate or love or equanimity or jealousy, that's where it came from. It all comes from us. The outside is just a stimulus. But the worst part is that for every mental volition, it leaves behind a record that we call karma. I also speak about the difference between the Buddha teaching and what exists before his time, which is the yogic teaching. And I talk about how before Buddha, karma was considered something that you cannot change because it was used by the oppressor. It was used by the oppressor to maintain their control, to say, oh, you are who you are because that's your karma. Buddha was the one that says, no, you can't change your karma. That's what it's all about. You can change your karma. And you change your karma by 2 things. Understanding what is non-virtuous and find a way of not doing any more of that. Improving the sensitivity of your body and your breath so that when one of those non-virtuous thoughts comes up, you recognize it. You might not recognize it with your brain, but your body says, ooh, that's not good. Or your breath says, ooh, that's not good. And you sense the change in your body and the change in your breath. And you say, okay, one is enough. I'm not going to do it a second time. That's called sedimentation, letting the dirt fall into the bottom of your lotus pond and let the clear water comes up. So try to understand what non-virtuous thoughts are, recognize it, accept it, and then let it go. The other one is to find ways of doing more virtuous thoughts, virtuous volitions. So starting today, I'm going to talk about the Buddhist practice, which is unique because it talks about changing of your karma, right? Emancipating your mind from the dark cloud. So today I'm just going to talk about what someone who considers himself Buddhist would do at the very minimum. Then we're going to talk about more, getting more in depth into what is called in Pali is Dasa means 10, Kusala means virtuous, Karmapatha is 10 ways of improving your karma by avoiding the non-virtuous act. We're going to talk about it next time. But most of us, we do the simplest things, which is called the 5 precepts. So the first precept is no killing. Very similar to the 10th Amendment, right? Except that this is not just about killing of humans. This is about killing of all beings. Now keep in mind that these 5 really have nothing to do yet with purification of our mind. Not yet. It's just about stopping all the non-virtuous act. It's actually about protecting others. So non-killing is about protecting the beings. So you say, oh, non-killing, does that mean vegetarian? Being vegetarian? It can, but doesn't have to be. Then you say, well, that's hypocritical. How can you stop killing if you eat meat? That's a problem. That's a problem. But I want you to know that Buddha himself was not a vegetarian. Many Buddhists are not vegetarians. You go to Japan, the monks eat meat. Right? You go to Tibet, the monks eat meat. And the reason that they eat meat has to do with the practice. Buddha was a monk. In Pali, a monk is called a Pichu. Pichu means beggar. All his followers at the time were beggars. Why? Because in the beginning, all his followers, all his disciples were rich people. And Buddha wanted to teach them how to renunciate the physical belongings. So he made them into beggars. And every day they get up in the morning, they have to beg for food. Now begging for food is called alms, E-L-M. It's actually a spiritual practice because for the monk, it's about giving up both the status, the ego, and the personal belongings. For those who offer, it's a practice too. They practice generosity, and then after they offer food, the monks receive it, they do some chanting, they give them some blessing, and then they practice gratitude. So in the very beginning, in old days, they don't say that they don't eat meat. They eat whatever is given to them. In fact, the way it was supposed to be is that they get up in the morning and they choose a different direction each time. So they don't visit the same people. And they don't allow the people who offer them food to actually prepare food for them. They just give them what they have. So they're very poor. They had a small fish today and they want to offer that. And so you eat it. And then every day they change direction. And every day, every time, they only go to 5 houses. And each time they knock, no one answers, they go to the next one. And no one answers, they go to the next one. If they don't get any food that day, they go hungry. And if they knock the first time, they give them lots of food. they still have to go to the second one and the third one and the fifth one. In fact, about 200 years after the death of Buddha, they had a big gathering because they had a big disagreement among the monks. And they eventually settled on 10 things that they disagree on. And you would think that maybe it has to do with money, whether or not the monks can collect money. Turns out that Buddha says, no, you cannot have money because you're supposed to renunciate. You have plenty of money. You have to give it up, so why ask for money? And so 200 years later, some of the monks said, oh, but that's very inconvenient. People want to offer money. Can we accept money? And some of the monks said, no. But it turns out that as important as that was the last of the 10. The first one, you cannot imagine what was the most important that they wanted that they disagree on, that they have to settle, is whether or not the monks can carry salt. So how is that possible? Why is that so important? It turns out that the idea is that if they actually follow Buddha's teaching and they go back for food, what if they have too much? Can they preserve it with salt and eat it for the next day? That was the key. So the reason the first precept is about no killing, it is about protecting the beings, but it's also about protecting yourself. That you don't want to get used to the idea that you can actually kill someone in front of you. That leaves behind very, very bad, very, very non-virtuous karma. And the Buddha says, don't do that. Don't do that. So that's the first precept, no killing. The second one is no stealing. No taking things that doesn't belong to you. No taking things that without permission. That is to protect your society, right? Protect your others. The third one is no sexual misconduct. Be faithful to your wife or your husband. That's clearly important. No lying. Now that gets a little bit tricky. Not telling the whole truth, is that lying? That's tough. That's a very tough one. That's a very tough one, especially from someone who's been a business person. I don't lie. I cannot lie as a business person, right? You cannot say something that is not real. If it's something that was not asked, do you have to volunteer it? Yes, if it's material. You have to make your own judgment. Finally, the last one says no taking intoxicants. Taking no intoxicant doesn't by itself create non-virtuous karma, but it's the gate. It's your last line of defense.